Okay, it's the standard grandpa drill. Everybody into the cellar.
Hey guys, welcome back. If you remember from last time, we had a bit of a problem with a freak storm causing the power to go out, but as you can clearly see, the storm has subsided, so now we can proceed as planned with no further interruptions. Alexa, stop. Look, I'm gonna level with you guys. I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that, as you can clearly see, the storm hasn't really let up for the whole month, actually. In fact, I think it's gotten worse. Pretty sure the weatherman said something about needing to evacuate or something, but I couldn't just leave my valuables behind. I need them to financially secure my future. The good news is that I said, Alexa, stop! Word of the wise, don't agree to babysit your neighbor's kid during a hurricane and then give them a boombox to keep them entertained. Anyways, the good news is that, as you can see, I was able to restore power to the office, so at the very least I could see where I'm going. And for a guy who was born with sunglasses permanently affixed to his face, yeah, that's kind of important. That being said, I haven't been able to go outside in over a month, so I've been feeling a bit of a mixture of cabin fever and writer's block for a while, and as such, I haven't really been able to come up with any good video topics for a discussion. Luckily, I found one of those random word generators on my phone to help me come up with ideas, and it spewed out sumo wrestler, disgrace showrunner, and Sean Jambroni. Hey, so remember Clarence? The general consensus of the show seems to have shifted massively from when it was originally airing, because I remember a lot of people did not really like this show when it was first airing. Or at least, from what I've heard. And that's a damn shame, because I was tuning in for every new episode that they were airing. It was never really my favorite show on at the time. I think I was still really into Adventure Time and regular show as my go-tos, and even when it came to shows with the more chillax vibe, We Bare Bears started airing a year after Clarence, and I definitely preferred the former. But with all that said, I was still tuning in for every single new episode. I don't know why, the show just resonated with me on a deep level. I mean, the titular character is a fat kid with a lisp and bad teeth. He just like me for real! Ah! But other than that, there were a lot of great details that kept drawing me back. For starters, I love the characters in this show, not only from a personality perspective, but also from a design point of view. There was no consistency with how the characters looked, and that was actually an intentional choice from the creative team. Unlike something like The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers, where the characters sort of have to conform to the style, with Clarence, the idea is that the world is full of people who look and act differently, and as such, the characters should represent that ideal. Not only that, but the show does a very good job showing us the class structure of society, with all of its characters coming from different families and backgrounds, as well as each one having a different financial situation. This is perfectly personified with the three main characters, as Sumo's family is lower class, Clarence's family is lower middle class, and Jeff's family is upper middle class. And they do a good job sticking to this sort of class structure throughout the whole show. What I mean by that is, looking at The Simpsons again as example, we're made to believe that the family are somewhere along the lines of the middle class, albeit that's a bit up in the air compared to where we are now financially speaking as a society versus where we were when the series first started airing, but that's a discussion for a different day. Anyway, yeah, so around the middle class. So they have to be very cautious with their money. However, depending on the plot of the episode, this idea could be more or less disregarded if, say, the family wanted to go to Europe or something on the drop of a dime. Meanwhile, with Clarence, you definitely feel this class struggle take place throughout the whole show, and they never ease up on it. With the Wendells, you can definitely feel the family sometimes struggling for money and the weight of that overbearing feeling. They never do anything that would seem extremely out of their financial wheelhouse, and because of that, it's all the more relatable. And yet, as seen with the three friends, they and their families aren't bothered by said differences between them because they enjoy one another's presence. It's very wholesome in a way to see these kids and their families from all walks of life just be very friendly to one another. Also, the show is like criminally funny.
I am not being a baby. You took over my whole party.
Gilbin.
Hey guys, I finished my comic!
Clarence, 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 Clarence.
I could go on and on about the many reasons that I enjoy Clarence and how great the show is, but I think I'll save that for another day. Instead, given the certain circumstances I seem to be facing right now, I think I'd rather spend my time today talking to you about the time that a nasty storm made its way through the town of Aberdale, and how that kicked off one of the greatest miniseries that Cartoon Network has ever produced to date, Clarence's Stormy Sleepover.
Clarence?
Surprise! We're having the biggest sleepover that we ever had!
In case you were confused by my terminology when I said mini-series, I meant it in the sense that that's how Cartoon Network themselves labeled certain events within shows that were sort of their own mini-stories, and not so much like actual mini-series like Over the Garden Wall and Long Live the Royals. I don't know why, but they seem to be very into these sort of special events in the late 2010s, with a few Teen Titans Go and Adventure Time miniseries that acted as their own little mini-arcs. And yet, even with my love for Adventure Time and its miniseries, I still think that Clarence has a beat with its Stormy Sleepover. While it doesn't do anything too ambitious or have these characters tackle things that they wouldn't otherwise, I think Stormy Sleepover is able to really understand the heart and the core of what the show is all about. Just to give you a quick rundown, Clarence's Stormy Sleepover took place around the beginning of Season 3 in June of 2017, lasting for 6 11-minute episodes. The centralized focus of these episodes is when a storm comes to Aberdale, and we follow a bunch of groups of characters to see how they deal with and react to the storm, all while dealing with their own personal problems as well. Meanwhile, Clarence is just doing his own thing and just wants a sleepover with all of his friends. While the first and last episode do a good job introducing us to and concluding said storylines respectively, the other 4 episodes are primarily focused on single storylines with said groups of characters. Right off the bat, it does something that I think was a really good choice. At this point in the show, we've gotten a lot of great development for the main characters, as well as a lot of the side characters too, and we know the groups and friendships that have formed because of this. But in this special, we have a bunch of character pairings that you would rarely ever see, but are forced to work together due to the circumstances. What I mean by that is, for example, in the second episode, we focus on Jeff and Mary and Chad, which doesn't seem like such an out there group on the surface as we've seen them all together and hang out plenty of times. However, each of these times have included Clarence in some way, and with him gone in this episode, there's no buffer between these characters, so there's more of an awkward air throughout the episode. Speaking of Clarence, that's another thing this special does that I really enjoy. While he's very present for the first, 5th, and 6th episode of the special, he's almost completely absent from the other 3 episodes, instead focusing on the side characters dedicated to said episodes. It's a very risky move to have the titular character missing from half the special, given that he's obviously the one who had the most screen time, but it works surprisingly well here. Throughout the series, the team has done a very good job of developing all the characters that Clarence interacts with on a daily basis, and as such, it definitely feels sort of akin to something like the town of Springfield, where almost every character feels like they have something to offer to the story outside of like a strict set of guideline jokes about said character, and even then does it better than some of those other characters at some points, not naming any names. I can also appreciate how, for the most part, while the special is played out in a sort of linear format with all the episodes either taking place at either the same time or directly after the power goes out, there are still hints of what to expect in the other episodes. The first episode of the special, Phantom Clarence, does a great job showcasing all the upcoming storylines, all while utilizing a fun narrative device. Instead of them just doing a simple cut to the scene trick, we see Clarence calling a bunch of people to invite them to the sleepover, ergo setting up a few of these storylines to see how they play out, as well as having an air of mystery to them, like what exactly is going on with Sumo and Miss Baker that we'll see with their respective episodes. Clarence himself, as always, is a delight in this episode. His behavior might sort of come across as stubborn to some, but it's in a very innocent, childlike way, like having a sleepover by himself when no one else shows up. He is eventually able to convince Jeff to come, so he dons his pretty jacket, dude, and heads off to get Jeff's favorite drink, leaving Jeff alone with Mary and Chad, which leads to an awkward yet extremely relatable scene between Jeff and Chad.
Just to go to sleep with a smile tomorrow.
The second episode, Jeffrey Wendell, follows up on said awkwardness, with Jeff being stuck with Mary and Chad while the storm cuts the power, with the added bonus of Jeff being struck with guilt when he thinks that his kite is the reason that the town lost power. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a very strange pairing, but it works surprisingly well in a comedic sense. Jeff's suspicious nature and clean freak attitude start to rub Mary and Chad the wrong way, as does their not very hygienic lifestyle clash with Jeff's cleanliness. There's a very clear sense of cabin fever playing an important role in this episode, with all three of them starting to go a bit insane, with Jeff taking it the absolute worst. Eventually, they desperately try to find Clarence when Jeff remembers that he has his walkie-talkie on him, so they all head to the car in search of Clarence. All in all, this is a very good follow-up episode. A lot of comedy falls on the awkward tension between the three, and I think it works very well here. Albeit some of this is also accomplished with a bit of gross-out humor, something that Clarence is somewhat known for, and something that's definitely not everyone's cup of milk. But it doesn't bother me too much, and it's relatively tame here by comparison. Trust me, it can get a lot worse for this show. There's also this sense that all the characters love and need Clarence, like he's a very big and important part of their life, and I love to see that, especially with Chad.
Hey little guy, where are you?
I'm probably lost forever.
Don't say that! I'll find you, boy!
Chad!
The next episode, Badgers and Bunkers, is a lot more of a wholesome, heartfelt episode, which is saying something when it starts like this.
Beautiful day.
Yep, world's gonna end.
That's too bad.
The episode revolves around Sumo and his dad, and I absolutely love their dynamic. It's very clear that they both love and care for one another, but neither of them are very good at verbally expressing their emotions, so they never really know what to say to one another, and as such, there's a big rift between the two.
I don't know what to do about Sumo. That boy just doesn't listen.
Wonder where he gets that from.
What?
The rift grows even bigger when his dad keeps the family in an underground bunker when he thinks it's the end of the world due to the power outage, and Sumo looks after an orphan badger that he names Candace that he tries to keep with him in the bunker without his dad knowing. You could definitely feel the tension in the air between the two, especially at the dinner scene. Despite all my praise though, I think it's probably my least favorite episode of the special. Don't get me wrong, it's still a really good one, and it has one of the best dynamics of the show. But that's just the thing. It's something that we've seen before in episodes like Dreamboat, the 15th episode of the whole series, and I'd argue it was done better there than 2 seasons later. I kinda wish the episode focused more on Sumo's siblings or his mom's relationship with him, since there hasn't really been a single episode to dive into that familial relationship. The following episode is called Dingus and McNobrain, and it follows Belson and Mr. Reese's time during the storm. This one is sort of a parody of a buddy cop duo, with Mr. Reese being the no-nonsense one, and Belson being the one who plays by his own rules. This actually sort of makes sense in context, given that we already know at this point that Mr. Reese used to be a cop, so it sort of makes sense that this is the route that they went down. Also, Mr. Reese is voiced by Donovan Patton, who was also Joe on Blue's Clues. I know that's not really important for the context of the episode, but I'm just now realizing this video isn't that funny, so I thought some random jaw-dropping factoid would make things a little bit peppier here. Is it working? Has her jaw dropped yet? Is it working? It's kind of surprising how well their dynamic works. The whole episode is them trying to find out what happened to Miss Baker, with the reveal being that she decided to leave Aberdale to move to California. Belson's able to figure this out before Mr. Reese does, and tries to hide the info from him before Mr. Reese pushes Belson's buttons and reveals the truth. This causes him to break down and cry, apologizing to Belson. You definitely feel bad for the guy here. It's clear that he cares for Miss Baker and is sad that she left without even saying goodbye. Even Belson gets some great character moments here, actually trying to protect Mr. Reese's feelings, but he also has a reasonable betrayal, where he turns on Mr. Reese when he's given the opportunity to wipe his permanent record clean. It's not like this comes out of nowhere either. Mr. Reese specifically mentioned at the beginning of the episode that the detentions would add up, and he'd actually have to repeat a grade if he kept getting in trouble. You definitely feel like both characters have justifiable motivations, and as such, there's no one side that you're rooting for. This is probably my favorite episode of the special. There's just something about the two of these guys working together that's very funny.
Ride hard, die hard.
Bye Bye Baker is the next episode of the special, and we finally reconvene with Clarence at the convenience store, where he runs into Meg, Miss Baker, Jeff's mom, and the mayor. Miss Baker was just making a pit stop here before heading off to California, but unfortunately the power outage hit the store, and it caused the automatic doors to power down, effectively locking the 5 of them in there.
So, I checked the backup generator. And turns out there isn't one.
Yeah, hooray! I mean, oh no.
This is another very out there group of characters to pair, and it works very well, albeit I'd say the driving force behind this working so well is mostly Clarence. One of the best things about him is that he's able to make the best of a bad situation, so he uses supplies from around the convenience store and makes an impromptu slumber party for him and the other people stuck inside. It's not until he learns that Miss Baker is leaving that he actually breaks down and cries, before convincing himself that she's not really going to leave Aberdale. This all comes to a head when Clarence quickly thwarts their one chance at escaping by flushing the spare keys to the automatic door down the toilet. This episode is another great one, and it really does a good job showing the contrast between a kid like Clarence and someone like Miss Baker. Her whole reason for wanting to leave in the first place is that she never really felt like she was needed in the town, and every little hurdle she faced in this episode was met with ire from her. Meanwhile, Clarence is able to show that with a positive attitude, you could turn even the worst of situations into an enjoyable experience, albeit one through the eyes of a kid. I love the dynamic between these two, and I'm glad that they were paired up for this episode. We've had a few episodes where Clarence and Miss Baker have shared the spotlight, and given that she's Clarence's teacher, we've seen them on screen together a lot, but this one definitely felt like the best of the two of them.
Somebody call for backup?
And we end this special off with Flood Brothers, which sees all the previous plot lines of the last 5 episodes not only come together, but also conclude in very satisfying ways. Mary and Chad reconvene with Clarence, Sumo and his dad find Candace, and Jeff realizes that he wasn't the cause of the power outage, as explained to him by a man who, wow, that he should probably see a doctor about that. That is definitely touching something important up there. Most of the focus is spent on Clarence trying to convince everyone to work together in hopes of having a big sleepover, as well as Miss Baker truly questioning whether or not she belongs in Aberdale. It's only when the gym starts flooding that Miss Baker finally steps up and helps keep the gym and the people of Aberdale safe, realizing that she is needed and important, and she loves Aberdale too much to leave. They use the bags of manure from Belson's trunk to wall off the water, and with nowhere to go until the floodwaters die down, Clarence's wish of having the biggest sleepover ever finally comes true as we come to the end of this miniseries. Some of you there might be confused as to how I think this is CN's best miniseries to date, miniseries in air quotes for the reasons I had mentioned earlier, when in actuality it seems like something like Adventure Time's miniseries were a lot more experimental and risky, yet had a much bigger payoff by having a larger scale with more characters and world building, and honestly, I think that's a fair thing to question. However, I feel as though Clarence's Stormy Sleepover is able to capture what is truly at the heart and core of what makes the show so great, like I mentioned earlier, and exemplifies those attributes to the highest regard. Clarence is a show that relies heavily on things like seeing the world from a kid's point of view, as well as the family, friends, rivals, crushes, and everyone else. Most importantly, the big takeaway from Clarence is that no one person is the same as the other. Everyone comes from a different family and a different background, and nobody looks or acts or feels the same way as one another. But just because that's the case, that doesn't mean that we can't all get along and work together, especially when the tough gets going. You know what, I'm getting a little tired of the storm outside. Hey! Stop it! I have no idea how I did that.